When I was younger, safe investing felt comforting. It felt responsible, mature, and aligned with everything I had been taught about money. Diversify broadly, avoid big mistakes, protect capital, and never take risks you cannot explain to someone else. That framework made sense in my 20s when time felt endless and mistakes felt reversible. After 30, that same approach started feeling different. Not obviously wrong, not reckless, but quietly unsettling. The strategies that once made me feel protected began to make me anxious. Not because they were failing on paper, but because they were no longer aligned with the reality of time, responsibility, and diminishing flexibility. The shift did not happen overnight. It crept in slowly, through small realizations that were easy to dismiss individually. Together, they changed how I understood risk entirely. In my 20s, volatility felt like the enemy. Watching numbers move up and down felt stressful, unnecessary, and avoidable. Stability felt like safety. If an investment barely moved, I could ignore it and focus on building my life. I had years ahead of me, and compounding felt like a distant force that would eventually take care of everything. Time was on my side, or so I believed. Safe investing in that phase meant minimizing visible mistakes. I avoided concentration. I avoided aggressive growth. I avoided decisions that could make me look foolish if they went wrong. The cost of being wrong felt higher than the cost of being slow. That trade-off made sense early on. After 30, the math changed, even if the advice did not. Time stopped feeling abstract. 10 years was no longer a vague future. It became a concrete window with edges. I could see responsibilities forming, commitments solidifying, and paths narrowing. The idea that I could simply wait longer if something did not work became less comforting. That is when safe investing started feeling risky. The first reason was opportunity cost. In my 20s, waiting felt harmless. In my 30s, waiting felt expensive. Every year that passed without meaningful progress was a year that could not be replaced. Compounding does not forgive hesitation. It rewards early movement and punishes delay quietly. Safe strategies often prioritize preservation over acceleration. They are designed to keep you in the game, not necessarily to move you forward quickly. When time feels abundant, that trade-off feels wise. When time becomes finite, it starts to feel dangerous. I realized that I had optimized my portfolio to avoid short-term regret, not to maximize long-term outcomes. That distinction mattered more than I expected. Another shift came from understanding inflation more clearly. Safe investing often means low volatility assets, conservative allocations, and predictable returns. On paper, these look stable. In real life, they are constantly competing with rising costs. Inflation does not care how calm your portfolio feels. It erodes purchasing power steadily, regardless of volatility. After 30, when goals become more concrete and expenses more fixed, inflation becomes a real adversary, not a theoretical one. A portfolio that feels safe because it rarely moves can still be losing ground every year in real terms. That loss is easy to ignore until you start projecting forward and realize how much purchasing power disappears over decades. At that point, safety feels fragile. Another reason safe investing feels riskier after 30 is responsibility. In your 20s, most financial decisions affect only you. In your 30s, they often affect others. Family, partners, dependents, and future obligations change how mistakes feel. Ironically, this added responsibility can make excessive caution more dangerous. When more people rely on your future stability, stagnation becomes a risk in itself. Protecting capital without growing it meaningfully can lead to a slow squeeze, where everything is technically fine, but nothing improves. I started noticing how many people around me were financially stable, yet permanently constrained. They owned assets, followed rules, and avoided disasters. They also lived with constant pressure because their systems had no margin. That pressure did not come from losses. It came from lack of growth. Safe investing also started feeling riskier because it encouraged passivity. Many conservative strategies assume that doing nothing is a virtue. Set it up, rebalance occasionally, and wait. That works when the environment is stable and predictable. The modern world is neither. Markets change. Industries shift. Opportunities appear unevenly. Being too passive can mean missing structural changes that require active judgment. After 30, when your earning years become more valuable, missing those shifts can cost more than short-term volatility ever would. I realized that risk is not just about losing money, it is about failing to adapt. Another subtle shift was psychological. Safe investing is often sold as stress reduction. Lower volatility means fewer emotional swings. That is true, but only up to a point. When returns feel insufficient relative to your goals, a different kind of stress emerges. Instead of worrying about market drops, you worry about timelines. Instead of fearing volatility, you fear stagnation. Instead of anxiety during crashes, you experience chronic unease during calm periods. That type of stress is harder to identify because nothing is obviously wrong. Everything looks orderly. The discomfort comes from intuition, not data. Ignoring that intuition can be costly. I also noticed that safe investing often assumes a static risk tolerance. It assumes that if you disliked volatility at 25, you will dislike it at 35. In reality, risk tolerance changes with context. In my 20s, I feared losing money because I felt inexperienced. In my 30s, I feared losing time because I felt the window narrowing. Those are different fears, and they require different strategies. Risk is not just volatility. Risk is failing to meet future needs. Safe investing often minimizes volatility at the expense of growth, which can increase the risk of falling short later. That paradox took time to accept. Another realization came from looking at historical outcomes. Long-term data shows that assets with higher volatility often deliver higher real returns over extended periods. The cost is emotional discomfort, not necessarily worse outcomes. When you are younger, emotional discomfort feels expensive. When you are older, missed outcomes feel expensive. That shift reframes volatility from enemy to tool. Safe investing also feels riskier after 30 because mistakes become less recoverable. That sounds counterintuitive, but it matters. When you are young, a bad decision can be offset by future earnings and time. When you are older, every decision carries more weight. That reality can push people toward extreme caution. Ironically, that caution can lock them into suboptimal paths that compound poorly. The fear of making a mistake can become the biggest mistake. I also noticed how safe investing interacts with income. Early on, income growth can compensate for conservative returns. Later, income growth often slows. At that point, investment performance matters more. A strategy that felt adequate when income was rising can feel insufficient when income plateaus. That transition often happens after 30, when careers stabilize and upside becomes less explosive. Safe investing does not adjust automatically to that change. Another factor is identity. By 30, many people have internalized an image of themselves as responsible, prudent, and sensible. Safe investing reinforces that identity. Taking calculated risks can feel like betraying who you think you are. That internal resistance can prevent necessary adaptation. You are no longer just managing money, you are managing self-image. That makes change harder. I also realized that safe investing often assumes linear life paths. Stable careers, predictable expenses, gradual progress. Real life rarely follows that script. Shocks happen. Opportunities appear unexpectedly. Systems that cannot respond quickly can turn stability into rigidity. Rigidity is risky. After 30, flexibility becomes more valuable than predictability. Safe investing often trades flexibility for calm. That trade-off can backfire when circumstances change. Another uncomfortable truth is that safe investing can hide inefficiency. When nothing breaks, nothing forces improvement. You can remain in a mediocre strategy for years without obvious consequences. Aggressive strategies fail loudly. Conservative strategies fail quietly. Quiet failure is harder to detect and easier to tolerate. That makes it more dangerous over long horizons. I also noticed how advice around safety rarely accounts for individual goals. Generic safety might not align with personal timelines. A strategy that is safe for someone starting at 20 might be risky for someone starting at 35. The same allocation can mean very different things depending on when you start. That nuance is often missing from conventional advice. Safe investing also started feeling riskier because it encouraged delayed gratification without sufficient feedback. You sacrifice now for a future that feels increasingly uncertain. Without visible progress, motivation erodes. That erosion can lead to disengagement, which is a real risk. I realized that investing is not just about optimizing returns. It is about sustaining behavior over decades. A strategy that feels too slow can be abandoned, even if it is theoretically sound. Behavioral failure is still failure. Another reason safe investing feels riskier after 30 is that it can amplify regret. When time passes and outcomes lag, you start replaying decisions. You imagine alternative paths. You calculate what could have been different. That mental accounting can be corrosive. Riskier strategies may produce losses, but they also produce information. You learn faster. You adjust sooner. Safe strategies delay feedback, which delays learning. Delayed learning costs time. I also realized that safety is contextual. Bonds can be safe in nominal terms, but risky in real terms. Cash can be stable, but destructive under inflation. Diversification can reduce volatility, but also dilute impact. After 30, real outcomes matter more than theoretical safety. Another shift came from understanding that not all risk is equal. Some risks are compensated, meaning they offer higher expected returns. Others are uncompensated, meaning they offer nothing but anxiety. Safe investing often reduces both indiscriminately. That can mean giving up compensated risk that you actually want. Avoiding all risk is not the same as managing risk intelligently. I started reframing safety as the ability to recover, not the absence of volatility. Systems that can absorb shocks, adapt, and continue are safer than systems that remain calm until they break. That perspective changed how I viewed investing entirely. I also noticed how age changes the meaning of mistakes. In your 20s, mistakes are lessons. In your 30s, mistakes feel like detours. In your 40s, they feel like constraints. Safe investing promises to avoid mistakes, but it cannot avoid detours entirely. It can only make them quieter. Quiet detours still lead you off course. Another realization was that safe investing often assumes that future you will be more disciplined than present you. That future you will stay the course, rebalance faithfully, and never panic. That assumption is optimistic. After 30, life complexity increases. Stress increases. Cognitive bandwidth decreases. Systems that require minimal engagement are valuable, but only if they are aligned correctly. If they are misaligned, they quietly drift. I also realized that safe investing can create a false sense of completion. You set it up, feel responsible, and move on. That feeling can prevent periodic reassessment. Markets change, goals change, strategies must evolve. Safety without review becomes complacency. Another subtle shift was noticing how safe investing interacts with ambition. In my 20s, ambition was career-focused. In my 30s, ambition became life-focused. I wanted options, not just stability. Safe investing often preserves what you have. It does not always help you create what you want next. That mismatch creates tension. I began to understand that risk is not a static concept. It changes with age, context, goals, and environment. What felt safe early can become risky later, not because the strategy changed, but because the stakes did. Safe investing feels riskier after 30 because the cost of being wrong about time is higher than the cost of being wrong about volatility. Once I accepted that, my approach shifted. I stopped equating safety with calm. I started equating safety with adaptability, margin, and trajectory. That did not mean reckless behavior. It meant intentional risk-taking aligned with timelines and goals. I learned that the real danger is not volatility. It is stagnation disguised as prudence. Safe investing did not become wrong after 30. It became incomplete. It needed to be contextualized, adjusted, and questioned. Risk did not disappear. It changed form. Understanding that difference was the most important investment decision I made.